Good evening. My name is Festus Ojo, and I'm a member of the RONU chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated.
And I'm Brianna Townsend, and I'm a member of the Lambda Upsilon chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated.
And first, we want to say thank you to everyone for joining us for the last panel in our Take the First Step series. This panel focuses on engineering, featuring alumni from both of our chapters with experience in software, biomedical, and chemical engineering. We're fortunate enough to have them here today to share some of their experiences and advice with all of us. We hope that everyone watching is able to learn something from coming. So we're going to start off with introductions of our panelists, followed by some questions we have prepared for today. We'll try to end with a few from people watching back home.
So first, I'll introduce the panelists from Lambda Upsilon. Our first panelist is Dr. Malika Jeffries-EL. She is a 1996 alumna of Wesley College, where she received a bachelor's degree in chemistry and Africana studies, followed by a master's and PhD in chemistry at the George Washington University. Her research primarily focuses on developing organic semiconductors, and she is currently a tenured professor at the Department of Chemistry at Boston University. Prior to this, she served as a visiting professor at MIT. Our second panelist is Chloe. A native of Atlanta, Chloe Garden is a 2018 alumna of MIT and a spring 2016 initiate of the Lambda Upsilon chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. She lives in San Francisco, where she works as a software engineer at YouTube. Chloe enjoys working on a product that a lot of people use every day and hopes to become a tech lead or designer in her industry. She is also passionate about mentoring and recruiting young students who are interested in entering the tech industry. And outside of work, she enjoys music and art.
Okay, cool. And now I'll introduce the RONU panelists. So first, we have Brother Chris Smith. He's an alumnus of MIT, class of 2006, with a BS in chemical and biological engineering. He then went on to obtain a PhD in biomedical engineering from the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. He's currently a senior resource scientist at Accel, a company that provides biomedical engineering solutions. Brother Smith has a track record of cultivating research collaborations and managing complex cross-functional research and development projects. And then last but definitely not least, we have Brother Grant Oladipo. He's an alumnus of MIT, class of 2007, with a BS in electrical engineering and computer science. He currently holds the title of Director of Engineering at Airbnb. He's the head of technology for software engineering, data engineering, and data science teams, which support the experiences business, the broad host community, and the Olympic and Paralympic strategic partnerships. He has extensive experience working in the industry, both at startups and larger tech companies. So now that we know who everyone is, we're going to hop into the questions we have prepared.
So what inspired you all to pursue a profession in engineering? And also for this first question, could you all please say your name before you begin, just so people can put a face to the name?
Hello, everybody. I'm Christopher Smith. So I think my inclination to pursue a career in engineering is basically I always wanted to solve a difficult problem that somebody else was either afraid to take on or said was too difficult, because I just always wanted to step up to a challenge. And also, I was always really good at math, but I was more interested in science. But at the same time, I wanted to be able to use something in science for an actual real world purpose rather than only for theoretical work, which is why I left academia and decided to pursue a job in industry.
Thank you.
For me, my degrees and training are in chemistry, but as I got going beyond my bachelor's degree and started doing PhD research, I started to become more interested in the area of materials. And so I did my degree doing organic synthesis of materials, but over the years, I've evolved and become more of an engineer. And in fact, now at Boston University, have a joint appointment in the Department of Material Science and Engineering, because for a while we used to do the chemistry in my lab and then outsource and collaborate to doing the engineering. But then I was like, that's kind of like the cooler, chemistry is the solid fundamental basis for everything that we do, but to actually also look ahead to that application and do that applied side of the work, it inspires us to do even more in the lab. And so I used to outsource it, and then myself and my students became more interested in just kind of looking at both sides of the house. It's also easier to get the feedback, but I guess I put up there as an example to say you're not siloed to whatever you get your degree in is not necessarily who you have to become. There's a lot of translational skills.
Hi, everyone. My name is Grant Oladipo, and I chose to become an engineer mostly because of the gratification of writing code and then being able to see what you created pretty soon thereafter. Very early on in my life, right about second or third grade, my parents actually purchased a VTech Power PC, and it had a QBasic function on it. And so one of the first pieces of software I wrote was a greeting application for my family. And just watching them interact with it, and then obviously investing in that skill set further. So that's basically what put me on this path.
Hi everyone, I'm Chloe. And I think for me, it was, well, when I was in high school, I was really good at math. It was my favorite subject in school. And I was introduced to just the concept of engineering through like summer camps and summer programs in high school. And I think I learned just the concept of writing code and like kind of like the workflow and the logic, the mindset you have to have. And I just really liked how it all worked. And I mean, I didn't know much about like particular languages or really the extent of what you could build, but I knew that I liked the thought process behind it. And so that is kind of what inspired me to go into engineering.
Awesome. Thank you. So next, what were some factors you weighed while deciding whether to go to grad school or straight into the industry? For example, Dr. Smith, can you talk about how you knew the PhD route was for you?
So I think surprisingly, one of the biggest things that made me decide to take that route is I did internships every summer while I was still in undergrad. And I realized that straight out of undergrad, if I wanted to still do work in engineering or in science, that basically I would need a higher degree in order to really have a career in research and development. I always wanted to be on the cutting edge of doing something new. But typically, if you didn't have a higher level degree, then you weren't put on the R&D teams. You didn't get the opportunity to work on the brand new, exciting stuff. And I think that's what originally gave me the idea of pursuing a graduate level degree.
My process was kind of convoluted. Initially, I just thought I was going to go to college and maybe go to med school because I was good in science. And when I got to college, I realized that I actually didn't like medicine. I didn't like biology at all. I really sucked at biology. Actually, I couldn't do the worm, the dissections. I was like, oh, I'm gonna make a lousy doctor. And my professors kind of explained to me all the different types of opportunities that were out there beyond school. And they pretty much hinted that I would be really limited if I just did a bachelor's in terms of my advancement, and suggested that I go straight away into a PhD before I got used to having money and making money. And that while I was still used to being a poor student, that I should continue on further and be a poor student for a few more years and get my PhD. And so that's what I decided to do. And going into that, not necessarily knowing if I wanted to do academics or industry at that point, but knowing that either path was still option for me with the PhD. So I just jumped into it straight in. And then during the PhD, refined my thoughts and realizing that I wanted to go the academic route. That kind of came along the way. But it's always been an evolution. You take a few steps forward, you kind of detour. I wanted to become a professor, but then it's like four-year institution versus research institutions. Okay, I had to look into that. I did a brief stint. I was a one-year visiting professor at Smith College, realized that while I liked teaching, I really loved research and that I wanted to be at a major research institution instead, and then did a postdoc and switched gears and then became a professor at a research institution. So lots of twists and turns. And for me, I don't regret it at all. Somebody said count every experience as just that experience. If your first career isn't your lifelong career, then it just becomes experience. So.
I love that. Yeah, similar to me, I had an opportunity to take a break near the end of my senior year while I was trying to decide what I wanted to do long term. And during that break, I had the chance to work at Zipcar really early. This is when the company had about 25 employees. And I had the chance to build some of their core infrastructure, including the way that they were able to raise money from municipalities because they were proving that they were taking cars off the road. I also got to build the internal scoring system for Zipcar, and I just got a lot of gratification from seeing that work actually affect the way that users were using the technology. This is also before the mobile revolution. So I built out the mobile portal on BlackBerries that allowed the technicians to open cars without having to call in and do that via the computer. So doing those things made me really fall in love with the fact that I was good at it. And I decided to kind of go into the industry rather than pursuing a higher level degree.
So for me, I had considered a couple options as far as grad school and like opportunities after graduation. I was thinking about a PhD, but wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do. Also had thought about the master's, the MEng program, so Masters of Engineering program that MIT has for its alum who are in the CS department. I think the biggest thing for me was that I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and I didn't want to commit to getting another degree if it wasn't something that I was going to use and if it wasn't something I was that interested in. And I had done a couple internships in undergrad and gotten like return offers. Basically had kind of dipped into the full-time software engineering world and had a pretty good like network and like foundation as far as entering working full time. So I decided to just go with that and, and use that time to save some money and decide, what I wanted to do next. So, yeah.
Cool. Thank you all so much for that insight. So on a more personal level, how has your racial identity impacted your experience in your career field? And someone from the audience wants to know, how do you balance maintaining strong relationships with your coworkers and addressing microaggressions at work?
So in my experience in this, so in the scientific community and the engineering community, it can be a little bit different. I've noticed that probably the most difficulty I had was in the scientific community. So when I was doing my PhD in biomedical engineering, I would spend a lot of time working with doctors and scientists by trade. And in that field, there's a lot of weight that's put towards your intellectual reputation. And so a lot of times you may run into people who may get upset when they get challenged intellectually by a minority. I mean, it's a real problem that I ran into. Is like people would literally get upset when they realize that a Black person was smarter than them. And it does happen sometimes. I realized in the engineering community, it wasn't quite as bad because a lot of times in engineering, you're working on such a difficult problem that if somebody has a better idea, you don't care whether you like the person personally or not. If they're going to help the team solve a problem, then they're more willing to listen. So I've had better experiences there. In terms of, and the one way to address that basically is like, if you find like mentors that can help guide you and tell you more specifically how to address when you run into certain problems like that. And then another thing that I've noticed is like, how do you like maintain having like a strong relationship with your coworkers? So luckily, I feel like even as a scientist or an engineer, we probably still deal with less microaggressions than people in other industries may face. In terms of addressing racial issues, I've rarely in my professional career had to address it specifically. Usually it's been more in a lighthearted conversation where I may teach not a person of color, a white person, I might teach them something about like things that we may suffer through. So I know one guy at work, one time he made a joke about how he was in a coffee shop and it was full of cops. And he was like, this is probably the safest coffee shop I've ever been in. And I was like, actually, for you, it might be the safest. But for me, I'm actually super nervous. And I mean, it was a lighthearted conversation, but that, in my experience, was the easier conditions to bring it up because it can be very difficult to bring up those topics, not necessarily for us, but for other people.
I got so drawn into what you're saying. I was thinking about the drinking coffee while Black people in Philadelphia getting harassed. One piece of advice I got early in my career was don't worry about fitting in. And at first I was like, that's so weird. Like, why wouldn't I want to fit in? And then I quickly realized like that the system wasn't set up for me. It wasn't made with me in mind, and I'm never going to fit in. And so I just decided I was going to be me and let everybody else have to adapt and adjust. And it's very challenging. I mean, my field is not very diverse at all. I walk into every scenario. I'm actually almost shocked when I see another Black person. I'm kind of like, wow, you here too? Like, I walk into almost every scenario, knowing what's going to happen. If I go to a committee meeting or even a conference, is that I'm probably going to be, one of the few people there, if not the only person there. And sadly, you just kind of expect it. In terms of, like I said, I never tried to fit in. I remember early in just being worried about my hair and like how I wore it and how people would judge me. And then I thought, I'm not going to stifle myself and just be, relegated to the same basic hairdo every day to make other people feel comfortable. Today it's going to be twists, and tomorrow it might be braids. And I remember I actually had been at my job for about 8 years when I decided to go natural, and I did like my big chop and like came in, with the little afro one day, and everybody was like, "Oh my God," shocked. And I just was like, I don't owe it to them to stay vanilla or to not be able to express myself the way I want to express myself. And so, yeah, but you do experience it. The microaggressions are real. As I climb the ranks and, in the professoriate, become, getting tenure, getting awards, getting funding, and all the different things, the metrics that are valued, you'd hear grumblings. She only won that award because she's Black. She only got that grant because she's Black. And I remember hearing a disgruntled colleague. He actually said that to another colleague who was equally as offended. What he actually said to her was, there was an NSF Career Award, which is a pretty big accomplishment for junior faculty, and both she and I won, and he didn't win. And what he said to her, and I laughed because she related to me, and I said, see, he felt comfortable saying that to you because he didn't want to say that to my face, is what he said to her is, I'm not surprised that you got it because you're a woman. And Malika had the best chance of them all being both female and Black. And she was so upset that he pretty much minimized all of her accomplishments to her own gender. And, when she told me this, I kind of agreed with her in that, and I smiled. And she said, how can you smile? What he said was so rude and so disrespectful to both of us, and yet you sit here smiling. And I said, because he's an idiot. We're 2 years older than him, and we'll get tenure before him and vote on his tenure. So why? Jokes on you, guy. I will be in a position to judge you later. But then I went on to her and I said, listen, maybe this is your first experience with idiots like this, but I don't let it, go down my, I don't let it pull me down. But I did have a conversation with him, and I said, yeah, I heard you said this. And he tried to back away from it. And I said, I would love if you could show me any piece of data which shows that I'm statistically more likely to succeed than you are as an Asian man in science because I'm a Black woman. I said, show me we're scientists. Show me the data where that's a proven fact. I'll wait. And he was like, oh, I don't know any particular references. That's not, I just kind of heard. I said, there is no data that backs that conclusion up. Not at all. And so, what I've just learned over the years is I do me. I don't carry people's baggage with me. I joke, I tell my friends I've developed a Teflon exterior. I don't let people's BS stick to me. So it's like, because they try to weigh you down with that and detract you from what you're trying to do. But it's going to happen. And when it happens, you'll sit there and wonder, did this just happen to me because I'm Black? Probably. And for those of you who are female, you'll sit there and be like, wow, is this a female thing or a Black thing? And if you actually get into certain circles where age becomes an issue, that's what happened to me. I was one of the youngest professors in my department. And then I had the triple dose. I was thinking, wow, like I had guys second guessing everything I did. And I thought, does he think I'm incompetent because I'm female, because I'm Black, or because I'm 30 years younger than him? Like, which one of these is it? And after some time and talking to various people, I decided, again, that was not my issue to carry forward. I'm not responsible for educating him. He was actually such a lost cause. I actually went to the administration, just insisted I got a whole new assignment. They tried to double down and say, oh, but it just works better for the schedule if you do that. And I said, listen, I worked with this guy for a year and it's been completely uncomfortable and unpleasant situation for me. And that's not my job. I'm not going to do it. That's not my job description. and they tried to figure out how to make the schedule work so we didn't have to work together. And what ended up happening is the only way it worked for us not to work together was he had to teach both sections of the class one semester, and I had to do them another. Instead of us each teaching one and one, we had to go 2 and 2. And I said, fine with me. That's how strongly I feel about not working with him. So anyway, don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. I've gone too long. I'm passing the mic.
Definitely not. That was awesome. Yeah, for me, probably the biggest struggle is that in the corporate environment, we talk a lot about mentorship and how that affects you in the academic environment. Once you move into the industry, sponsorship is so important. But unfortunately, sponsorship by default works by those who have authority and influence, investing in those who look like them, those who they see some common experience in what they were like when they first got into the industry. And so obviously, if you just run the numbers, there's not a lot of people who look like me at the companies that I worked at. And similar to Dr. Jeffries-EL, I was often the only person, definitely on my teams or at my entire company, who looked like me. So what I learned is that I needed to advocate for sponsorship. I needed to use a combination of networking, excellence in my work, and a confidence to just walk up to the most senior exec and say, this is what I've kind of done here. And, I'd love to continue doing this type of work and playing a bigger role in the success for our company. That has definitely gone super far for me, including helping me, outline the next opportunity. Because executives between companies talk, right? And if you have a sponsor on your side, then they're kind of paving that path for you through the industry. So that's definitely a challenge. The microaggressions are real, but I really love the advice to do you. Nothing speaks louder for you than the excellence of your work and the fact that other people who collaborate with you will observe that excellence. And there's probably countless situations where somebody's either been trying to denigrate me or, I felt like I was in an environment where I really wanted to show off, but I didn't have to represent myself. The people who I'd worked with in the past who kind of observed me operate were my best cheerleaders and did that for me in those situations.
I'd also agree that the microaggressions are real. It's pretty common to be, one of the only or the only Black person or Black woman on your team or in your working environment. I've found that a lot of, I think being Black in a sense kind of helps to connect with other Black people. I think it makes it easier. There's resources that are specifically for like Black and brown people. And I've found those to be very useful. So organizations like Deaf Color and Code 2040 have been extremely useful for me, especially early in my career. It does make it a lot harder for, as someone mentioned earlier, like finding sponsorship, as that is pretty important. I found that like there are people on my team that just don't they don't know who I am, and they don't, you really have to speak up for yourself. Because they don't pay much attention to you. I've noticed that people on my team, the only time that they'll like give me, like a second look or give me more attention outside of my work is when they see me with like the Black ERG and we're like at some event that they were not invited to. And so, yeah, I think that's been my experience so far.
Thank you so much for that. Okay. I guess you guys kind of hit on this earlier, but just to follow up and someone asked from the audience too. So for Dr. Smith and Dr. Jeffries-EL specifically, how did you guys go about selecting schools and programs to apply to for grad school? And combining that with that question from the audience, was there ever a time or moment in your grad studies where you felt like engineering just wasn't the right path for you?
So I think in terms of figuring out what type of degree to get, I may have had a similar experience that she did, and that I actually considered an MD as well. I started my PhD program and I considered doing MD, PhD. The thing that had happened to me is that I was friends with a lot of MD students, and then I started to learn that that wasn't really what I wanted to do. And also, as I was working on my PhD and doing biomedical engineering, I had other friends who were doing PhD programs in other departments. And a lot of their work was more science focused and less engineering. And so I think interacting with people who were doing a similar path, but not the exact same as mine, is what helped me realize that I was doing the right thing for me. And because the thing is like a PhD is an extremely long process in terms of how long it takes to finish that degree. And it's also very frustrating along the way because if you're doing it in a science, you're going to spend a significant portion of your time doing experiments. And if you're doing something new, a lot of it is not going to work. And so that's probably one of the hardest things to get over when you first start doing research in the scientific community is that a lot of what you try isn't going to work. And so it's easy to get frustrated. And so it was useful to have a support network of people, not necessarily just mentors, but people around your own age too. And that helped me figure out what was the right path for me.
For me, when I was trying to figure out where I would go to school, it was kind of a mixture of different influences. I did have good mentoring in terms of my professors who made suggestions and recommendations about programs. Now I'm going to date myself a little bit because I'm older than most of you. So we didn't have the internet at our fingertips on our phone to just really, websites for schools were just primitive. And so you really couldn't learn necessarily as much as you could these days. And so people's recommendations and suggestions, oh, I went here and it was great. Or, I know somebody who went there and it was very good, factored heavily into my decision for the schools that I applied to. But ultimately, when I made the decision as to which school to attend, it really just came down to my comfort zone. My advisor was really trying to push me to go to a school that was a very good institution, but it was way out in the Midwest. And as a native Brooklyn, New York girl who had never left the East Coast, I just couldn't fathom uprooting my life and moving all the way out west and away from family and things and those considerations. To the point that was brought up earlier, I knew I was going to go into a very isolated situation. And I realized that while I could tolerate that in my workplace, I needed my home life to provide me with some support. And so I couldn't go out to the middle of nowhere and do it. So I stayed on the East Coast and was close by to two of my siblings who were able to hold me down emotionally as I went through my PhD process. And that was a great decision for me. My program was tough. It really was lacking in support. And it was just great to just kind of walk out those doors and, go home or go to my sister's house or go to my brother's house and have that familiar smell of, some good old home cooking and just, eat a biscuit and calm down and recant the events of the day. And so it's important, I joke and say, people tell students the best advice is to go to the best PhD program you could get into. But I tell students you want to go to the best PhD program you can get out of. Because, if you go to a top tier program, they chew you up and spit you out without a degree. That was a complete and utter waste of your time. So, if you got into like the number one program in your field and you hear it's a hostile environment for people of color, should you do it? Maybe you better off getting a degree from the number 10 program that's more welcoming and more supportive, or, and so on and so forth. So you have to look at the big picture. Go somewhere where you're going to be supported, whether it's in your program or just in the community, but go somewhere where you're going to be supported, or else you really will have a very sad 5 years. Like Chris said, it's a long period of time. I don't remember if there was another part to the question, but if I missed something, I can get back to it.
Yeah, really quick, I think I did miss part of the question is about deciding which school to go to. And to piggyback off of what she said, I went to Johns Hopkins University. And so it had at the time that it was the number one biomedical engineering program in the country. So that's why I originally applied. I also was interested in moving back closer to home because I'm from Tennessee. And so I applied to Georgia Tech as well. And their program was really good as well. What ultimately helped me make the decision is when I actually visited the schools, the network of students there, the Black student community was a lot more tight knit and stronger there. And I kept getting advice that it's going to be it's a difficult process. And so it's really important that you have a strong support structure there. So I ended up picking where I thought I would be happier. Not necessarily where I thought it was going to be best for my career, because the impression that I got was that, both are going to be fine for my career either way.
Mm-hmm.
That's great advice, both of you. Thank you so much. So specifically for Chloe and Mr. Grant, specifically, what advice do you guys have on getting your first job or like passing those dreaded technical interviews? And how did you decide where you wanted to begin your career?
I didn't so much decide where I wanted to begin. I think my longer term career, when I was entering the industry, it was right around the 2008, 2009 economic struggling time period. And at the time, I had actually passed my Google interviews and was intending to join Google, but they required you moved out to the West Coast for at least a year before you could relocate to one of their remote offices. And in particular, I wanted to stay in the Boston area. So didn't end up doing that and joined Booz Allen Hamilton to start consulting while also doing technical work. Which was a very, very different interview process versus kind of your run-of-the-mill software engineering interview process today. That being said, after having interviewed quite a few people and built teams at a few different companies, I'd give a few points of advice. One is to really think about the business that you are joining and not just the fact that you're joining a tech company, right? The reality is that tech company is not actually very descriptive of what exists out there. I'm at Airbnb. It's a hospitality company that obviously leverages technology to deliver its services. Uber, Facebook, and all of these companies actually fit within an industry. That's important because as you move up within the organization, the importance of how passionate you are about the business and how much you can understand that business will actually affect the way that you can progress. Second, understand the culture of the company that you're joining, right? And part of that is also understanding how they evaluate talent. So some companies will be, very focused on this, whiteboard coding exercise, sometimes referred to as leak coding in our industry. While other companies care more that you're an adequate problem solver and you're a good communicator, because that's important to building effective software teams. I think you need to really understand what that interview process is going to focus on and how that connects to the internal, operating culture of the company, and decide if that's something that's really important for you. If it is the former, then practice. I think Chloe mentioned DevColor, which is an organization that myself and a few of our classmates started up a few years back in the Bay Area. And in addition to sponsorship, we also do a ton of practice mock interviews, right? Nothing is better than doing a dry run and actually understanding what that experience is going to be like. This is just important to me. Like, your ability to communicate is extremely, extremely important in terms of how you work with teams. So I would just really think about what type of, how you want to show that skill. There's not always a specific interview for it, but usually companies are looking for that signal as well. And I just want to make sure that I answered the full part of the question. So yeah, and I mean, passing technical interviews is really just about practice.
Yeah, I would agree. I think practice was the most important thing. I did a lot of interviews in my senior year, and then similar interviews for internships in college. And so, yeah, just practice it. And the interviews are kind of weird because usually they're not the same as what you would be doing on the job from day to day. So it's kind of like a special skill. But I mean, it does help you. It does show the way that, your thought process and the work that you would do every day. So yeah, lots of practice. And then as far as choosing a company, so I guess I received a few pieces of advice when picking a company for my first job out of college. I think the most important that a lot of people stress to me, the most important thing is opportunities to learn and grow, because especially early in your career, you want to learn as much as possible, figure out what you like and don't like. And, in early career, yeah, it's most important to just up your skill and your speed. So yeah, I think a few other important things are the people that you work with, and the environment you're in, kind of similar to what Malika said about being somewhere where you have like a support system, or you can build a support system. So yeah, I think for me, so I'm at Google now, specifically at YouTube, and I did a year-long program called the Google's Engineering Residency, and it's specifically for college new grads. So it's a rotational program, and I knew that with that, I would be able to try out different teams. So I could work on different code bases and kind of like improve my skill on multiple things. And I would also have more of a choice in who I worked with. And I also liked it because I would be entering with other new grads. So I would have that kind of support system with people who are kind of in similar shoes as me. So yeah, those are just some things to consider in picking your company and your role.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. That was super helpful. And then we have a question specifically for Mr. Grant. I know you have a lot of experience with startups and even like starting your own. So someone asked about turning a passion project into a fully functional business. Do you have any thoughts on that, and just in general, the idea of betting on yourself and trying to start your own thing instead of joining something else?
Yeah, I think it's a super complicated subject, and I would just encourage. I love betting on yourself, right? So it doesn't matter to me how crazy your idea is, or how many obstacles might be between you and success. I think if you believe in yourself and you think it's possible, I would definitely say go for it. That being said, the way you go for it is probably what matters the most. And if you have an idea, you should be looking for the fastest path to test whether it's viable in the market. You should be thinking about who wants to use your idea and who is going to actually spend money to allow you to build a business around it. And to me, I think if you're really focused on what is the minimum thing you can do right now to prove that this is a viable concept, and then to validate that the market exists, then you should be able to take any idea that you believe in and move forward with it. Probably the other piece of that advice, though, as much as I again believe in believing in yourself and trying it out, you also need to know when to stop, right? So what are the signals you're going to look out for so that you know that this is something you're no longer trying to invest in, right? Some of the folks who've done this in the past, I think, I've heard a few retrospective stories where they're like, I knew kind of a year or two ago that I should stop, but we just decided to keep going. So I think kind of understanding what your goal is and what's the hypothesis, and when have you determined that it's successful or not, is probably where I'd start. But every idea is different, and there's always a path as long as you're focused on proving that the market exists.
Thank you so much. So I feel like something that is not discussed enough in engineering classes, at least the ones that I've taken, and I think several others, is the ethics behind the products being built and who's being impacted by them, especially as those mostly impacted the worst are often Black or Brown people. Can you share any thoughts you might have about this now with respect to your career?
All right, so to answer that question, I currently work for a company that makes diagnostic tests. So realistically speaking, any product that we make, if you actually want to use it for patients, then you have to go through the FDA. And when going through the FDA, they make sure that you properly test it and provide enough evidence to demonstrate or prove that whatever you're making does have a medical benefit and can't be used to manipulate or take advantage of people for money. So in my field, usually that's not quite as much a concern because there are government organizations and regulations to prevent people's health from being manipulated. Now, recently, since the coronavirus outbreak, the FDA, they've been basically reducing a few of the restrictions, not so much reducing, but there's another path. It's called emergency use authorization that will allow you to get some type of medical product, allow people to get access to that. Now, you still do have to provide evidence and present evidence, but then there's still a bit of a concern. And so the biggest thing there is like the scientific community in general. As long as you're not manipulating your data, giving people false information or anything like that, then there's a pretty sound methods to make sure that you're following basic ethics and making a product that's really going to be beneficial for somebody. So in my field, it's not as difficult to make sure you're following a path that is still ethical.
I'll comment to that on the academic side. One thing that most of the major institutions are doing at the doctorate level is actually having this responsible code of research training that's required for all doctoral students. And I think it's an important step because a lot of people learn from the people near them, and when you work with people who are unethical and you haven't been trained otherwise, you may not be aware of what they're doing. And so I think just to make it part of people's training to understand what the laws are around certain things and what is ethical behavior and what isn't. And to be truthful, most people know the black and white. You know what's legit and you know what's shady, but it's that gray area in the middle. That's where people get confused, and that's where things get manipulated. And so to really give people clear guidelines to understand the various circumstances that often present themselves when doing research and how one should conduct themselves, I think really positions people in the field to do better when they go out into the profession, to say, oh, well, I learned from my ethics class that, this would be violating somebody's trademark if we actually did it, went downloaded their patent off the internet and did it this exact same way and called it something else. And, so we teach them a lot of different things. And I think it's helpful. One surprising thing is even just in Chris mentioned falsification of data, is that while some falsification of data is intentional, often it's just mostly from negligence and poor practices rather than intent. And so to really teach students about the importance of keeping good notebooks and keeping good records and accounting for errors. Often somebody says, oh, I don't know, that looks different, and I don't know why, to say, that's not good enough. You really should figure out why all of a sudden it's different if everything else really is the same. And so I find it helpful. The students who go through it usually say, at the time when they're learning, they're kind of like, what? And then I see students years later and they're like, oh my God, Dr. J, this happened in my lab. And, and I knew what to do because I remember in class you said, and so it can be helpful to train people, I think.
Yeah, this manifests itself in two ways at a place like Airbnb. As we think about evolving our product, we depend on two functions, largely user research and data science. User research, this is people actually going into the community, talking to end users, trying to get a sense anecdotally for where the opportunities are to evolve the product or service that we're delivering. From a data science perspective, this is looking at data from users of the product and trying to determine if their behavior can present an opportunity for us to invest in and then take advantage of that from our business. In both areas, user research, what we've noticed is that obviously people tend to look at the majority population, and you don't have representative insight around how, like, a Black host, for example, might think about putting their home on Airbnb. We also noticed that if you look at the hosting community, it's definitely not equal, even representation across like national norms. And so, things like being Black on Airbnb while Black are problems that we've tried to combat by looking at the distribution of diverse representation in these kinds of populations. We also noticed that everyone knows that more diverse teams create a more diverse product, and often it's through levers like this that happens, right? So a Black researcher, in fact, some of the Black researchers at Airbnb, they're very specific about having that equal representation. Black data scientists are kind of more triggered by the fact that data obfuscates the population and want to dig in to be sure that this is not a really biased number that is just having the majority population speak louder than the others. But I think the other big part of this is that even though our workforces in the Bay Area are becoming more diverse, we're noticing that that's not necessarily happening in the highest leverage functions, right? So you're not necessarily seeing increased diversity in product managers and engineers and those who are really deciding the path of these products. And that's where we're still trying to invest to be sure that when we try to tackle challenges like this, we're getting diverse representation.
Yeah, I don't have much to add on that one, but yeah, I agree that ethics is not really taught as much in engineering classes. I think So within my work, I've seen like different teams have initiatives where they're working on trying to make their product, I guess, just like more usable, more accessible for Black and Brown people. But I don't think, yeah, I don't think it's always useful. I don't think it's always for the right reasons either. I see a lot of like kind of like fake. I think people call it fake wokeness, but a lot of efforts that are just like so that so that people will get off their back, so that they can say that they have like have made efforts for diversity and inclusion, but don't usually seem to like look for what the actual problem is and then try to fix it from there. So yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that insight. So next, we have another question from the audience. Someone asked, what skills and activities did you focus on in undergrad to be successful in your current career? And what things were like definitely transferable, or what things did you pick up on the sides to make sure that you were able to be successful day to day?
I would say probably one of the biggest lessons I learned in undergrad that's useful and throughout adult life is work-life balance. Because at MIT, the amount of studying and homework that you have to do throughout the week was always horrendous. I was adamant about not doing any schoolwork on Friday and Saturday, with the exception of having a final or something on the following week. So I would basically just disappear like Sunday through Thursday. I don't follow that exact schedule in adult life, but basically learning how to schedule your time, or at least structure it so that you can get stuff done is important, especially when you get to a professional career and then you may have 3 or 4 projects that you're working on at work throughout the week, and you have deliverables on all of those projects. So you have to make sure you can divide up your time. So I think that's probably one of the best things I learned.
I think for me, one thing that I thought was understated, especially when you're in like, engineering and science, is, you focus on those technical aspects, but writing and communication is so key in everything you do. And I actually had to seek additional training outside of my main coursework to get that in. But I realized when I actually started writing my first technical papers, I was like, oh, I'm really going to need to be good at writing. And I wasn't good at writing. And so that was something I worked on. And then over the years, I've actually been fascinated with just even how communications evolved, to how to get your PowerPoint from just being basic, how to step your game up and look at other mechanisms for presenting your science and talking about your work to people. And I think that's something that's understated, but so important. You could do really good work, but if you can't tell people about it in a cohesive fashion, you're not going to get anywhere. So I'll throw that on the list.
Yeah, the first 2 were great. Definitely agree with those. I'll add being able to break down a problem into pieces. Definitely didn't realize it while I was going through MIT. Definitely did not intentionally focus on it, but it is an incredible skill that is actually quite lacking in the industry, in my opinion. And it's important not only as a entry level engineer, but also as you become more senior. Even when you're leading an organization of hundreds of engineers, you need to be able to take a problem, break it into pieces, delegate that to sub teams, right, who then break that further down, and kind of understanding how to keep up with all of those moving pieces in an organized way is a skill that has definitely led to at least success for me.
I think in college, I did a lot of like community building work outside of school. So I was really, really active with the BSU and with AKA. That took up so much of my time. And I think that in retrospect, I think that participating in those and having a lot of leadership positions in those helped me a lot as far as like communication and leadership, even in my work now. Because I mean, it does go beyond the technical skills. So I think that was really important. I didn't know how that would how those skills would be useful, or if they would be useful after in industry, but I think they are pretty useful. And then I also just did a lot of just any small thing I could find or do to build up my technical skills, to add to my resume, I would go after. So MIT has like I think the admin for the CS department has an email list, and every day she'll send out like 30 emails at a time of people who are just like looking for MIT students for different opportunities. And so from every now and then I would just scroll through all those emails and see if there was anything that I found interesting. And even if I didn't think I was like an expert at whatever they were asking for, I would reach out and say, hey, like, this is my skill set. I'm really interested in learning. I'm a student. If there, if you have anything you could provide, or if you would be willing to help me learn, I'm willing to like, do as much as I can. So I think that was also really important. So just learning how to be scrappy. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So in closing, do you guys have any other general career advice for students listening today, especially things that they could be doing in the midst of a pandemic? This could look like resources, skills, frameworks to practice or check out, for example.
So I don't have anything that's specifically related to what to do during a lockdown. I think one piece of advice that nobody ever gave me that I actually had to figure out on my own is that I strongly encourage people to always seek out mentors, always ask for guidance and advice as much as you can. But one thing that what you may realize is that at the end of the day, you do have to chart your own path somewhat. Part of the reason is because even the best advisors, they won't have your exact career path. You may meet someone who has a high level position that you've always wanted, or something like that. Maybe it's a CEO of a large organization. And so you get a chance to meet that person and they give you advice. Chances are the path that they took, their exact path probably won't work for you because so much has changed in society and in that industry over the years. That's especially important when I learned in academia, because the professors that I worked with when I was in graduate school, the path that they took to academia it wasn't the same at all. Like nobody was doing 6-year postdocs in the 90s in order to get professorships. It just didn't happen that often. So always take the advice, but never be afraid to like basically build your own path from what you learn a bit, because you may find that there's not any one person that you can follow exactly, because things are just different over time and your career path is not going to be the same as anybody else's. And also, especially if you're thinking about doing something brand new, like starting your own company, you definitely should know that your situation is not going to be like anybody else's. And you shouldn't be afraid to do things a slightly different way or take on a new challenge that hasn't been addressed yet.
I guess my advice would be, if at first you don't succeed, try something else. You don't have to get it right. You don't have to get it right the first time. Just focus on the fundamentals. And I love when I see people reinvent themselves, and we kind of have a picture of what we should be when we're in our 20s, and then in our 30s it's more clear what we can be. And don't be afraid to make that pivot if it presents itself. You're not siloed into whatever you started in. I mean, one of my friends from undergrad did the whole English econ thing as an undergraduate major, went off to law school, thought she was going to be a corporate lawyer, did that for a little bit, didn't like it, and now is a New York Times bestselling author. So you don't have to stick in something because it was your major, or because your parents expect you to. Find what works for you. Find something that you love, like the saying goes, and you'll never work a day in your life. But find something passionate, and think before you leave. I always ask myself, like, is it a dead end? That's the only thing. You don't want to leap into a job that's just a dead end, but making stops along the way towards your dream career is more than acceptable.
For those aspiring software engineers out there, I would say build something. It doesn't have to be a potential business, just use any framework, preferably something that's relatively new and is picking up adoption. but just build something, right? Nothing is more valuable than the experience of having done it. If you can, build something with some other people, right? Writing code by yourself is very different from collaborating, and the collaboration piece is really important when you get into the industry. Just anecdotally, when I was at MIT, we didn't really have good courses that were using the technologies that were being used in the tech industry at the time, right? I think our best class was 6170, which is a software engineering course focused on rebuilding big maps, right? Using like an A-star algorithm for Google Maps. So we were building a Google Maps clone. But even that was using a very different technological approach to building like a full stack software. So I really think if you can use some of the things that are either kind of cutting edge now or being used broadly, then you get some really good experience, and nothing is as valuable as that. It also brings like some authenticity to your interviews, if you can refer to something where you actually like done that type of work.
Yeah, I think building something is great advice. If there was something that you took, or a concept that you went over, like briefly went over in class that you're interested in, do some more research on that. See what other people are building. Yeah, do research. Try to reach out to people. I think that's another good thing. Check out LinkedIn, see if there are people who are doing the type of work that you're interested in, who maybe are an alum of your school or from your organization, and see if they have a minute to talk to you. At the worst that can happen is they say no or don't respond. So yeah, just, I don't know, be scrappy. Just figure out what you can do and like go for it.
Perfect. Thank you all so much for that. Well, that concludes our panel. And with that, our Take the First Step series. I want to say thank you to everyone for joining us for this past hour, as well as to our amazing panelists for their time and for sharing their wisdom. I also want to let everyone know that a recording of this panel and all the 3 earlier ones can be accessed at the same links that were originally streamed on. We hope this series serves as an opportunity for all watching to learn something and get something from home. So thanks so much and take care.